The night I nearly died, none of my 4 children answered the phone. But the woman next door, someone I had known for less than a year, broke my kitchen window with a brick to save my life. I remember opening my eyes on the cold tile floor and seeing her face above me. Her gray hair was falling loose around her cheeks. There was blood on her hand from the broken glass, and she was shouting my name as if losing me would break her heart. "Stay with me, Margaret. Please, stay with me." In the distance, I could hear sirens. My phone lay a few feet away. Its screen was still glowing. 4 outgoing calls, 4 unanswered calls, 1 to each of my children. As the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher, my neighbor, Helen, held my hand. And in that moment, through the fear and pain, I understood something I had spent years refusing to accept. I had raised 4 children. I had changed thousands of diapers, packed countless school lunches, sat beside hospital beds, paid tuition bills, forgiven broken promises, and given away almost every dream I once had. But when I needed a family, it was not one of my children who came through the door. It was the woman who lived next door. My name is Margaret Ellis. I was 76 years old when I finally learned that family is not always the people whose photographs hang on your wall. Sometimes, family is the person who notices when your curtains have not opened in the morning. Sometimes, it is the person who remembers how you take your coffee. And sometimes, family is the person willing to break your window because saving you matters more than waiting for permission. But to understand how I ended up on that kitchen floor, you need to know the story of my children and the story of everything I gave them. Chapter 1: The House We Built. My husband, Robert, and I bought our house in 1968. It was a small, white, 2-story home on a quiet street in Ohio. The paint was peeling around the windows, the pipes rattled every winter, and the backyard was mostly weeds. But to us, it felt like a palace. We were 23 years old, newly married, and too young to understand how quickly a lifetime can pass. Robert worked at a manufacturing plant on the edge of town. I was a secretary at a local elementary school. We did not earn much, but we were careful. We saved coupons. We bought furniture secondhand. We painted the living room ourselves, though Robert spilled half a can of blue paint across the floor and tried to cover it with a rug before I noticed.
Please give it a like, subscribe.
I noticed. I laughed so hard that I cried. That was the kind of marriage we had in the beginning. Not perfect, but full of laughter. Our first child, Daniel, was born 2 years after we moved in. He arrived during a snowstorm. Robert drove to the hospital so slowly that at one point I screamed, "Either step on the gas or deliver this baby yourself!" Daniel was a serious little boy with dark hair and thoughtful eyes. Even as a toddler, he seemed to study the world before deciding whether it was worth his attention. 2 years later came Susan. Susan entered life loudly. She screamed until the nurses laughed and said, "This one is going to make sure nobody forgets her." They were right. Michael was born 3 years after Susan. He was gentle from the beginning. He loved animals, collected injured birds, and once tried to hide a stray cat in his bedroom for 3 weeks. Our youngest, Emily, came unexpectedly when I was 34. By then, I thought our family was complete. But the moment the nurse placed Emily in my arms, I knew she had been missing from us all along. 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, 1 crowded house. Our kitchen table was never quiet. There were cereal bowls, homework sheets, Arguments, laughter, spilled milk, and Robert's newspaper folded beside his coffee. Every morning, I woke before everyone else. I packed lunches, I found missing shoes, I signed permission slips. I braided Emily's hair while Susan complained that her blouse was wrinkled. Daniel usually forgot something important at the last minute. Michael always tried to bring an animal to school. Once it was a frog. I remember standing in the front doorway after they had all left, looking at the silence they left behind. I would lean against the wall and breathe. At the time, I believed exhaustion was the hardest part of motherhood. I did not yet understand that one day I would miss every sound, even the shouting, especially the shouting. When Daniel was 12, Robert lost his job. The plant closed with very little warning. One Friday, Robert came home early and sat at the kitchen table without taking off his coat. I knew something was wrong because he did not touch the coffee I poured for him. "They're closing the whole place," he said. I sat across from him. For a while, neither of us spoke. We had 4 children, a mortgage, and less than $1,000 in savings. Robert found temporary work wherever he could. He repaired fences, he painted houses, he delivered furniture. I started cleaning offices at night after my school job ended. For nearly 2 years, I slept 4 or 5 hours each night, but the children never knew how afraid we were. Daniel still got his new shoes for basketball. Susan still went on her class trip. Michael still got the braces he needed. Emily still had birthday cakes with pink frosting and too many candles. Mothers become very skilled at making sacrifice look ordinary. We say, "I'm not hungry," when there is not enough food. We say, "I don't need a new coat," when the old one no longer closes properly. We say, "I'm fine," because our children should not have to carry the weight of adult fear. I had once wanted to become a teacher. Before Daniel was born, I enrolled in evening classes. I completed almost 2 years. Then the children needed me more. I told myself I would return later. Later is a dangerous word. It can hold a dream for so long that one day you realize the dream has died quietly in your hands. But I did not resent my children, not then. I attended every school play. I sat through freezing football games. I baked cookies for fundraisers. I helped with science projects I did not understand. When Daniel was accepted into college, we celebrated in the kitchen with a grocery store cake. The tuition was far more than we could afford. Robert and I took out a loan against the house. Daniel did not know. He did not need to know. "I'll make you proud," he told us. "You already have," I said. Susan wanted to become a nurse. Michael dreamed of opening his own veterinary clinic. Emily wanted to move to New York and work in publishing. One by one, they left. I helped pack their boxes. I washed their sheets. I slipped money into coat pockets. And each time one of them drove away, the house became a little quieter. At first, I told myself this was success. Children were supposed to leave. Parents were supposed to be proud. Still, after Emily left, I walked upstairs and stood inside her empty room. There were small pieces of tape on the walls where her posters had been. A broken hair clip rested beneath the dresser. I sat on the edge of her bed and cried. Not because she had gone, because I suddenly understood that the years I had believed would last forever were already over. For a while, the children came home often. Sunday dinners continued, though not every Sunday. Then every other Sunday. Then once a month. Then only on holidays. Daniel became a financial advisor in Chicago. He married a woman named Claire, who was polished, ambitious, and always in a hurry. Susan moved to Florida after marrying a surgeon. Michael opened his veterinary clinic 3 hours away. Emily did move to New York. She worked for a publishing company and traveled often. Their lives expanded. Ours grew smaller. Robert and I adjusted. We took evening walks. We planted tomatoes. We watched old movies. Sometimes we sat on the porch and talked about the children. Daniel sounded tired, I would say. Susan works too much, Robert would answer. Michael should take a vacation. Emily needs to meet someone. Even after our children had become adults, they remained the center of our conversations. Then Robert got sick. At first, it was small things. He forgot where he put his keys. He asked the same question twice. He missed a turn on a road he had driven for 30 years. The diagnosis was Alzheimer's disease. I remember the doctor's office, the framed diplomas on the wall, the humming fluorescent light, Robert's hand trembling in mine. We drove home in silence. That night I stood in the bathroom and cried into a towel so he would not hear me. For 6 years I cared for him. I helped him dress. I reminded him who people were. I put locks on the doors after he wandered outside one winter night, wearing only his pajamas. The children called. They visited when they could. At least that was what they said. Daniel came twice a year. Susan usually came for Christmas. Michael visited more often, but his clinic kept him busy. Emily called from airports, hotels, and taxis. They loved their father. I know they did. But love from a distance often leaves the hardest work to someone else. There were nights Robert became frightened because he did not recognize me. "Where is Margaret?" he would demand. "I am Margaret," I would tell him. "No," he said once, pushing me away. "Margaret is young." I went into the hallway and leaned against the wall. The man I had loved for nearly 50 years was searching for a version of me that no longer existed. Still, I stayed beside him. On his final morning, he was unusually peaceful. The sun was coming through the bedroom window. He looked at me for a long time. Then he whispered, "You have beautiful eyes." It was what he had said to me on our first date. I do not know whether he truly recognized me, but I choose to believe he did. Robert died holding my hand. The children came for the funeral. For 3 days, the house was full again. There were coats in the hallway, cups on every surface, voices upstairs, and grandchildren running through the rooms. I almost forgot my grief because I was busy caring for everyone else. After the funeral, they began leaving. Daniel hugged me near the front door. "You'll be all right, Mom?" "I'll be fine." Susan held both my hands. "You should think about moving somewhere smaller. This is my home." Michael said he would call every week. Emily cried the hardest. "I hate leaving you alone." "I won't be alone," I lied. By sunset, they were all gone. I walked through the house, turning off lights. In the living room, Robert's chair sat empty. His reading glasses were still on the side table. I sat in his chair and waited for the pain to come. But what came first was silence. A silence so complete that I could hear the old clock ticking in the hallway. That was the first night I understood loneliness could have a sound. That Christmas, I expected the children home. I bought a turkey large enough for 12 people. I brought boxes of decorations down from the attic. I hung the stockings we had used since the children were small. A week before Christmas, Daniel called. "Mom, Claire's parents rented a place in Colorado. The kids really want to ski." "Oh," I said, "that sounds lovely." "You understand, right?" "Of course." The next day, Susan called. Her husband had hospital responsibilities. They would not make it. Michael's wife had already promised her family they would visit. Emily had a work deadline in New York. In less than 48 hours, my Christmas disappeared. I stood in the grocery store staring at the turkey in my cart. A woman beside me reached for a bag of potatoes. "Big family coming?" she asked. "Yes," I said automatically. Then I looked down at the turkey. "No," I corrected. "Actually, they're not." On Christmas Day, I made a small pot of soup. I sat at the kitchen table alone. At noon, the children called one by one. Daniel's grandchildren shouted in the background. Susan was opening gifts. Michael was driving somewhere. Emily sounded exhausted. Each conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. Each child ended with the same sentence. "Love you, Mom." "I love you too," I answered. And I believed them. But after the final call, I looked at the 4 empty chairs around the table and wondered why love could exist and still feel so much like abandonment. Helen Parker moved into the house next door the following spring. The previous owner, Mr. Jennings, had died, and his children sold the house quickly. I noticed the moving truck on a rainy Tuesday morning. A woman stood in the driveway wearing yellow rubber boots and directing 2 exhausted movers. She was short, round-faced, and somewhere around my age. At one point, a cardboard box split open. Books fell across the wet pavement. I watched from my window for nearly a minute before putting on my coat. When I reached her driveway, she was kneeling in the rain, trying to gather the books. "Let me help," I said. She looked up. "You'll ruin your shoes." "They're already old." Together, we picked up the books. Most were mystery novels. "You like crime stories?" I asked. "I like knowing the bad person gets caught by the last chapter." I smiled. "That would be nice in real life." She laughed. It was a deep, warm laugh. "My name is Helen. Margaret." "I know," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "The mailman told me. Also, you watched me through your curtains for 20 minutes." "I did not." 18 minutes then. That was how our friendship began. Not with a dramatic moment, not with a great act of kindness. Just 2 older women standing in the rain holding wet books. The next morning, Helen knocked on my door with a plate of cinnamon rolls. I baked too many. There were exactly 2. "You baked 2 too many?" I asked. "I'm bad at math." I invited her in. We drank coffee at the kitchen table. She told me she had been widowed for 9 years. She had one son, David, who had died in a car accident when he was 37. She had no grandchildren, no brothers or sisters, no one except a distant cousin in Arizona. "I'm sorry," I said. Helen stared into her coffee. "For years, people stopped talking about him because they were afraid it would make me sad." She looked up. But silence made me sadder. At least when someone said his name, it meant he had existed. So I asked, "What was David like?" Her entire face changed. She told me he loved baseball. He hated onions. He could repair anything except relationships. He played the guitar badly. He called her every Sunday. We talked for 3 hours. Before she left, she touched the back of the chair across from me. "Same time tomorrow?" I laughed. "You're inviting yourself?" "Yes." "All right." The next morning she returned, then the next. Soon, coffee with Helen became part of my life. She noticed things. That was her greatest gift. She noticed when my mailbox was still full at noon. She noticed when I limped. She noticed when I pretended not to be disappointed after one of my children canceled a visit. She never said, "They're busy." She never said, "At least they call." She simply said, "That hurts." It was the first time someone allowed me to admit it. Michael had promised to visit on my 75th birthday. He called 3 days before. "Mom, I'm so sorry. We had 2 emergencies at the clinic." I sat on the edge of my bed holding the phone. "That's all right. I'll come next month." "You said that last month." There was a pause. "I know." I immediately felt guilty. "I'm sorry, I know you're busy. I'll make it up to you." After we hung up, I looked at the birthday card I had bought for my grandson. His birthday had been 6 weeks earlier. I had been saving it to give him in person. At 10 o'clock on my birthday morning, Helen knocked on the door. "Put on something nice," she said. "Why?" "Because I refuse to celebrate your 75th birthday while you're wearing that robe." "I'm not celebrating." "Yes, you are." She took me to a small diner outside town. When we entered, the waitresses started singing. There were balloons tied to a booth. A chocolate cake sat on the table. 3 women from Helen's church were waiting. So was Mr. Ruiz, the widower who lived across the street. Even the mailman stopped by. I stood inside the doorway, completely speechless. Helen leaned close. "People cannot celebrate you if they do not know you need celebrating." I blinked back tears. "My children were supposed to come." "I know. I didn't tell you. You didn't have to." During lunch, my phone rang twice. Daniel sent a text. "Happy birthday, Mom. Busy day. We'll call later." Susan sent flowers. Emily left a voicemail from an airport. Michael called after 9 that night. By then, Helen and I were sitting on my porch eating leftover cake. "I'm sorry I called so late," he said. "It's all right." "Did you do anything special?" I looked at Helen. She was licking chocolate frosting from her fork. "Yes," I said. "My family took me out." Michael sounded confused. "What family?" I hesitated. Then I said, "My friends." Helen pretended not to hear, but I saw her eyes fill with tears. Over the next year, Helen became part of every ordinary day. We went grocery shopping together. We attended church. We watched old detective shows and argued over who the killer was. She helped me repaint the guest room. I helped her organize David's photographs. On Sundays, we cooked dinner together. Sometimes we invited people from the neighborhood. Sometimes it was only the 2 of us. One afternoon, while we were washing dishes, Helen said, "You always set 6 places." I looked at the table. She was right. I had placed 6 napkins, 6 forks, 6 glasses. Habit, or hope. "I suppose I'm foolish," I said. "No. I keep thinking one Sunday they'll all walk through that door." Helen dried a plate slowly. "Hope is not foolish. It feels foolish. Hope is beautiful," she said. "But it should not be the only thing keeping you alive." I turned toward the sink so she would not see me cry. The following Thanksgiving, all 4 children promised to come home. For the first time in years, the entire family would be together. I spent 2 weeks preparing. I washed curtains. I polished silverware. I bought gifts for the grandchildren. I made Daniel's favorite pecan pie, Susan's sweet potato casserole, Michael's stuffing, and Emily's cranberry bread. Helen helped me carry groceries. "You're cooking enough for an army," she said. 4 children, their spouses, 7 grandchildren. "And me?" I stopped. I had assumed Helen would spend Thanksgiving with us. "Of course you're coming," she smiled. "I was waiting for the invitation." On Thanksgiving morning, Helen arrived at 7. We cooked side by side. The turkey browned in the oven. Christmas music played softly. At noon, Daniel called. Their flight had been canceled because of a storm. At 12:30, Susan called. Her youngest had a fever. At 1, Michael called. His wife's mother had fallen and needed help. Emily called last. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I missed my train." I stood beside the kitchen counter. The table was set for 19 people, 19 plates, 19 glasses, 19 folded napkins. "Can you catch the next train?" I asked. "There isn't one until tomorrow." "What about renting a car?" "It's 5 hours, Mom." 5 hours. As if distance had become an impossible thing, as if I had not spent my entire life crossing every distance for them. "I understand," I said. "Please don't be upset." "I'm not." That was my favorite lie. After the call ended, I stood very still. Helen entered from the dining room. "All of them?" she asked. I nodded. She looked at the table. Then she reached for her coat. "Where are you going?" "To find 19 people." "Helen." But she was already outside. 40 minutes later, she returned with Mr. Ruiz. Behind them came a young single mother from 2 streets over with her 2 children. Then an elderly couple from church. Then a college student who could not afford to travel home. Then the mailman and his wife. Then 2 nurses Helen knew from the community clinic. Within an hour, every chair was filled. People ate my children's favorite dishes. They laughed. They told stories. The little girl beside me asked if she could call me Grandma Margaret. I looked across the table at Helen. She lifted her glass. "To full tables," she said. Everyone repeated it. "To full tables." That Thanksgiving was one of the happiest days I had experienced since Robert died. And that made me feel guilty. I had spent the day laughing with strangers while my own children were absent. That evening, after everyone left, Helen and I washed dishes. "I shouldn't have enjoyed today so much," I admitted. "Why?" "Because my children weren't here." Helen turned off the faucet. "Margaret, joy is not betrayal." I looked at her. "You are allowed to love the people who show up." Those words stayed with me. You are allowed to love the people who show up. Winter arrived early that year. The first snow came in November. By January, the steps outside my back door were covered in ice. Helen had warned me not to go outside alone. I ignored her. I had always been independent. I carried groceries, I shoveled snow, I climbed ladders. I told myself age was only a number. Then one morning, I stepped onto the back porch and fell. My hip hit the edge of the step. The pain was immediate, sharp, blinding. I could not stand. The temperature was below freezing. My phone was inside the house. I shouted, but the street was quiet. For almost 20 minutes, I lay in the snow. Then Helen appeared. She had noticed I had not opened my curtains. She called an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctor said I had fractured my hip. I needed surgery. The nurse asked, "Who should we contact?" I gave her Daniel's number. He did not answer. Then Susan. No answer. Michael was in surgery at his clinic. Emily's phone went to voicemail. The nurse looked at Helen. "Are you family?" Helen looked at me before answering. "Yes," she said. "I'm her sister." I almost laughed. Instead, I cried. Helen stayed through the surgery. She slept in a chair beside my hospital bed. She argued with the nurses when my pain medication was late. She brought my robe from home. She combed my hair. Daniel arrived 2 days later. Susan came the following weekend. Michael called several times. Emily sent flowers. They all sounded worried. They all said they wished they could do more. But Helen was the one who helped me return home. For 6 weeks, she cooked my meals. She helped me shower. She washed my clothes. She drove me to physical therapy. One afternoon, while she was helping me put on my shoes, I said, "You shouldn't have to do this." She tightened the laces. "Neither should you." "I mean, I'm not your responsibility." Helen sat back. "That's what people say when they think love is a contract." I stared at her. She continued, "You do not have to belong to me for me to care what happens to you." I reached for her hand. "You're a better sister than the one I never had." She squeezed my fingers. "And you're the closest thing I have to family." Neither of us knew how true those words would become. After my fall, the children began discussing my future. Not with me, about me. I discovered this during a video call. Daniel had called all 4 siblings together. Their faces appeared in little boxes on the screen. "We're concerned," Daniel began. "I'm doing better." "That's not the point." Susan leaned closer to her camera. "You can't stay in that house alone." "I'm not alone." Michael sighed. "Mom, Helen is your neighbor. She can't be expected to take care of you forever." "I never asked her to." Emily looked uncomfortable. "We found a retirement community near Daniel." I felt my chest tighten. "You found one?" "It's very nice," Daniel said quickly. "Meals, activities, medical staff." "What happens to my house?" They all became quiet. That silence answered me. "You want to sell it?" "It would help pay for your care," Susan said. "My care?" "You know what we mean." I looked around the kitchen. The cabinets Robert had built. The doorway where we had marked the children's heights. The table where birthdays, arguments, homework, and Christmas mornings had taken place. "This house is my life." Daniel's voice became firmer. "It's just a house, Mom." Just a house. To him, perhaps it was. To me, every wall held a voice. Every room held someone I had lost. "Do any of you want me to live with you?" I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. 4 faces froze. Daniel looked down. Susan cleared her throat. Michael said, "Mom, that would be complicated." Emily whispered, "My apartment is tiny." I nodded. "I see." "That's why the retirement community makes sense," Daniel said. I ended the call. My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped the laptop. Helen found me crying at the kitchen table. She did not ask what happened. She simply sat beside me. After a while, I said, "They want to put me somewhere." "What do you want?" No one asked me that. "I'm asking." I looked at her. "I want to stay home." "Then stay." "What if they're right? What if I fall again? What if I become a burden?" Helen's expression changed. "You have spent your entire life making yourself smaller so other people would never feel burdened." I looked away. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "Do not disappear just to make your children comfortable." That night, I made a decision. I updated my will. Not out of anger, not yet, but because for the first time, I understood that my children saw my house as something waiting to become theirs. I needed them to remember that I was still alive. 6 months later, on a warm June evening, Helen drove to visit a friend in another town. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said. I can survive one night without you. She pointed a finger at me. Open your curtains in the morning. Yes, ma'am. And keep your phone nearby. I'm 76, not 6. Sometimes I'm not sure. We laughed. That evening, I ate soup and watched television. Around 9, I felt pressure in my chest. At first, I thought it was indigestion. Then the pain spread into my shoulder. My breathing became shallow. I reached for my phone. I called Daniel. No answer. Susan. No answer. Michael. Voicemail. Emily. No answer. I tried Daniel again. The room tilted. I attempted to stand but fell beside the kitchen table. The phone slid away from me. I lay on the floor, struggling to breathe. I remember thinking how strange it was that a life could end in the same kitchen where it had been lived. I thought of Robert. I thought of my children as babies. Daniel asleep against my chest. Susan running through the sprinkler. Michael holding an injured bird. Emily dancing on top of my shoes. I did not feel angry. That surprised me. I only felt tired. Then everything went dark. Helen returned early. Her friend had developed a headache, so they cut the visit short. As Helen pulled into her driveway, she noticed my kitchen light was on. She knocked. No answer. She called my phone and heard it ringing inside. She walked around the house, looked through the kitchen window, and saw me on the floor. The back door was locked. She called 911. The dispatcher told her to wait. Helen did not wait. She found a brick near the garden. She wrapped her coat around her arm. Then she broke the window. By the time the paramedics arrived, she was kneeling beside me, holding my hand. I had suffered a heart attack. The doctor later told me that 10 more minutes could have changed everything. When I woke in the hospital, Helen sat beside me. There was a bandage around her hand. "You broke my window," I whispered. It was an ugly window. "You always hated those curtains." That too. I tried to smile. Then I saw my phone on the table. Did they call? Helen's expression answered before her words did. Not yet. My heart had survived the attack, but something else inside me finally broke. Daniel called 12 hours later. Susan called after lunch. Michael arrived the following morning. Emily flew in that evening. They stood around my hospital bed, frightened and apologetic. Daniel spoke first. I was at a dinner meeting. Susan said her phone had been on silent. Michael had been sleeping. Emily was on a flight. Each explanation was reasonable. Together, they felt unbearable. Michael looked at Helen's bandaged hand. "You broke into the house?" "She saved my life," I said. "We're grateful," Daniel replied. "But this proves Mom can't live alone." I stared at him. That was what he had taken from the situation. Not that I had called 4 children and no one answered. Not that Helen had risked herself to reach me. Only that the house should be sold. "I'm going home," I said. Daniel shook his head. "Mom, I am going home." Helen squeezed my hand, and this time when my children began talking over me, I did not become quiet. "I raised all 4 of you," I said. The room fell silent. "I gave you everything I knew how to give. I gave you my time, my health, my money, my sleep, and most of my dreams. Mom, we know." "No, Daniel, you don't." My voice trembled, but I continued. "I do not expect you to stop living your lives. I never asked you to visit every week. I never asked to move into your homes, but I did expect to matter enough that I would not feel ashamed for needing you." Susan began to cry. I looked at each of them. "You say you love me. I believe you. But love that never arrives begins to feel like a word people use because they are afraid of what the truth sounds like." No one spoke. Helen lowered her eyes. "You want to know why she broke my window?" I asked, pointing toward Helen. "Because she noticed. She noticed when my curtains stayed closed. She noticed when I was sad. She noticed when I was pretending." I took a breath. She became my family because she showed up. Emily covered her mouth. Michael stared at the floor. Daniel's face had gone pale. For the first time in my life, I let my children see the full weight of what their absence had done to me. And for the first time, I did not comfort them afterward. I returned home 2 weeks later. Helen had replaced the kitchen window. She hung bright yellow curtains. "They're terrible," I said. "They're cheerful. They're blinding." "You're welcome." My children began calling more frequently. At first, I answered every call. Then I realized guilt could sound a lot like concern. Daniel called to discuss the retirement community again. Susan called to ask about my medication. Michael offered to install a medical alert system. Emily promised to visit soon. I accepted the alarm system. I refused to move. A month later, Daniel arrived without warning. He found Helen and me planting flowers in the front yard. "We need to talk," he said. We sat in the kitchen. Daniel placed a folder on the table. Inside were papers related to selling the house.
I'm not signing these.
"Mom, you had a heart attack." "I'm aware. You could die here. I could die anywhere." He rubbed his forehead. "You're being emotional." "And you're being disrespectful." His eyes widened. I had rarely spoken to him that way. I folded my hands. "I changed my will." Daniel became still. "What does that have to do with this?" "The house will not automatically be divided among you." "Who are you leaving it to?" I looked toward the window. Helen was outside watering the flowers. "I'm turning it into a small community home for older women who have nowhere else to go." Daniel stared at me. "You're giving away our inheritance?" "Our inheritance. Not your home. Not Dad's house. Our inheritance." Something inside me became very calm. "Your father and I paid for this house." "But we grew up here." "Yes, and you left." His face hardened. "You're punishing us." "No, I'm using what I have to help people who understand what it means to need a door that opens." Daniel stood. "Does Helen have something to do with this?" "Helen reminded me I'm still a person." "You barely know her." "I know she came when I needed her." "That doesn't make her family." I looked directly at my son. "Then what does?" He had no answer. He left angry. That evening I cried, not because I regretted my decision, because some part of me had still hoped he would understand. Helen found me sitting on the porch. "You don't have to give the house away," she said. "I want to. You don't owe me anything. It isn't for you." She looked surprised. "It's because of you." I took her hand. "You showed me what this house could become. Not a monument to the family that used to live there. A shelter for people who still needed one." For several weeks, Daniel did not call. Susan called, but she was careful. Michael visited alone. He sat at the kitchen table where he had once done his homework. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For all the times I thought calling was the same as being here." I studied his face. Of all my children, Michael had always been the softest. "I know your life is busy." "It is, but sometimes busy is just the excuse we use when something makes us uncomfortable." He looked toward Robert's empty chair. "After Dad got sick, coming home scared me. Every time I visited, he was worse. Then, after he died, the house felt different." It felt different to me, too. I should have thought about that. He reached across the table. "I can't change the past, but I want to do better." That afternoon, he repaired the loose railing on the back steps. He came again 2 weeks later. Then Susan arrived. She stayed for 3 days. On the second night, we sat in the living room. "I was angry with you," she admitted. "Why?" "Because you made me feel like a bad daughter." "I told you how I felt." "I know. That's why I was angry." She wiped her eyes. "I've spent years telling myself you were strong, that you didn't need much. It made my life easier." I looked at her. "You were always strong," she said, "but we used your strength against you." I began to cry. She moved beside me and placed her head on my shoulder. For a few minutes, she was not a 60-year-old woman. She was my little girl again. Emily came next. She stayed for an entire week. She cooked badly, she organized my medication, she hung photographs. On her final evening, she said, "I always thought there would be more time." So did I. That's the problem, isn't it? Yes. Daniel was the last. He arrived on a Sunday afternoon. Helen and I were serving dinner to several neighbors. Daniel stood in the doorway holding a pecan pie. "You made that?" I asked. "No, I'm trying to apologize, not poison you." Everyone laughed except him. After dinner, we walked into the backyard. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he stopped near the old oak tree. There were lines carved into the bark where Robert had measured the children's heights. Daniel touched the highest mark. Dan, age 16. "I thought you loved this house because of us," he said. "I do." "Then why give it away?" "Because love should not sit empty." He looked toward the windows. "I thought the house would always be here." "So did I." "And you." I nodded. He lowered his head. "When you called that night, I saw the missed call. I was talking to a client. I told myself I'd call back in 20 minutes. His voice cracked. "I forgot." I placed my hand on his arm. "I know." What kind of son forgets his mother called? A human one. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry." This time, his apology did not sound like guilt. It sounded like grief. I embraced him. Forgiveness did not erase what happened, but it opened a door. And for the first time in years, Daniel walked through it. The following year, renovations began. We converted the upstairs bedrooms into small private rooms. We added safety rails, a wheelchair ramp, and an accessible bathroom. The dining room became a shared gathering space. Helen insisted on naming the house. She chose the open door. "Our doors are usually locked," I reminded her. "It's symbolic." "It's misleading. You complain too much." The first woman to move in was Ruth, an 81-year-old widow whose landlord had sold her apartment. Then came Linda, who had no family after her sister died. Then June, a retired music teacher whose children lived overseas. I continued living in the house, so did Helen. She sold her home next door and moved into the room across from mine. "After everything, you're choosing the room farthest from the bathroom?" I asked. "I like the sunlight." "You'll regret it at 2 in the morning." I regret most things at 2 in the morning. The house became noisy again. Not the same noise as before, but good noise. Coffee brewing, women laughing, music playing, someone always losing her glasses, someone always burning toast. The kitchen table was full every Sunday. My children started visiting regularly. Not perfectly, not every week, but enough that their presence no longer felt like a holiday miracle. Daniel helped manage the finances for the open door. Susan arranged medical screenings. Michael brought therapy animals from his clinic. Emily wrote about the project, and donations began arriving from across the country. My grandchildren visited too. They learned the stories of the women who lived there. They carried groceries. They played cards. They listened. One Thanksgiving, the table was so crowded that we had to place 2 folding tables in the living room. My 4 children sat among the women of the open door. Helen stood to make a toast. "To Margaret," she said. I immediately objected. "No speeches." She ignored me. "To Margaret, who spent her life believing family was something she had to earn by giving everything away." The room became quiet. Helen looked at me. "But family is also what we build when we finally allow others to give something back." She lifted her glass. "To the people who show up." Everyone raised their glasses. "To the people who show up." I looked around the room, at Daniel, Susan, Michael, Emily, at Helen, at Ruth, Linda, and June, at grandchildren, neighbors, and friends. For years, I had believed my life was divided into 2 groups, family and strangers. But life had taught me something far more complicated. Children can love you and still fail you. Strangers can meet you and become essential. Forgiveness can exist without pretending the pain never happened, and family is not always defined by blood. Blood may begin a relationship, but presence is what keeps it alive. Helen died 3 years later. She was 82. It happened peacefully in her sleep. The night before, we had watched an old mystery movie. She correctly guessed the killer in the first 10 minutes. She always did. Before going to bed, she paused in my doorway. "You opened your curtains this morning?" she asked. "Yes." "Good." "Good night, Helen." "Good night, sister." Those were the last words she ever spoke to me. At her funeral, every chair was filled. My children stood beside me. The women from the open door sat in the front row. Neighbors lined the walls. So many people came that others had to stand outside. Helen had once believed she had no family, but as I looked around that room, I realized she had built one everywhere she went. After the service, Daniel took my arm. "You all right, Mom?" "No." It was the truth. And because he had changed, he did not try to fix it. He simply stayed. That was enough. I am 81 now. The open door is still operating. We have expanded into Helen's old house next door. 12 women live between the 2 homes. Every morning, someone opens the curtains. Every Sunday, the table is full. My children call. They visit. Sometimes they cancel. Sometimes they disappoint me. People do not become perfect simply because they are forgiven. But now we speak honestly, and they know love is not only what you feel, it is what you make time to do. Above the kitchen window, I hung the brick Helen used to save my life. Daniel cleaned it and placed it inside a wooden frame. Beneath it, Emily added a small plaque. It reads, "Family is the person who breaks the window when the door will not open." Visitors often ask what it means. I tell them the truth. I tell them I raised 4 children. I loved them more than my own life, and for a while I lost them. Not because they stopped loving me, but because they began believing there would always be more time. Then a neighbor showed me that family can be chosen through small, faithful acts. A cup of coffee, an opened curtain, a chair at the table, a hand held in a hospital room. My children are still my family. Helen did not replace them. Love does not need to remove one person to make room for another. She simply taught all of us how to become a family again. And sometimes, late in the evening when everyone has gone to bed and the house is quiet, I sit in the kitchen where I once lay dying. I look at the yellow curtains Helen chose. I look at the full table, and I think about the life I almost missed because I was waiting for certain people to walk through the door. Now I understand. Do not spend your final years staring at an empty doorway. Turn around. Someone may already be sitting beside you. Someone may already be asking how you take your coffee. Someone may already be choosing you. And perhaps that is the greatest gift life can give us. Not the family we expected, but the family that showed up.